What happens when a black woman moves into a wealthy white neighborhood only to have a local cop demand a contribution to keep her safe? Now imagine she calmly says no, and imagine that officer, used to being obeyed, escalates from quiet intimidation to pulling a gun in her own front yard. But here's what he doesn't know. She's not just another new resident. She's the deputy director of the FBI. And when she makes one phone call, his world begins to fall apart. Stay with us. Because this isn't just a story about power. It's about what happens when the silence breaks. In Fairgrove Hills, order wasn't just expected, it was enforced. Lawns were manicured, driveways were pressure washed, and unspoken rules about who belonged were followed without ever being written down. Officer Craig Benson had patrolled this quiet suburban stretch for over a decade. He knew every parked car, every weekend gardener, every early morning jogger. To outsiders, he was just another community officer. But to himself and to many of the longtime residents, he was something more: the gatekeeper. So when a moving truck rolled up to 178 Pinehurst Lane on a breezy Thursday afternoon, Benson noticed. And when the woman who stepped out wasn't accompanied by a husband, a realtor, or even a neighborly welcome committee, only by her own confidence, he noticed even more. She was black, alone, and visibly composed. She wore a crisp cream blouse tucked neatly into tailored slacks, her hair pulled back, her posture relaxed. She gave the movers quiet, efficient instructions as they brought boxes up to the porch. A few residents peeked through their blinds. No one approached. Her name was Nadine Walker, and though Benson didn't know it yet, she had seen men like him before. 3 days later, just as dusk began to settle over the tree-lined street, Benson pulled his cruiser to the curb across from 178. He took his time adjusting his cap, straightening his badge, then walked deliberately across the street. Nadine was sitting on the porch with a mug of tea, her posture calm but alert. She looked up as he approached. "Good evening," he said, forcing a neighborly smile. "I'm Officer Craig Benson, just doing a quick round through the neighborhood. Figured I'd stop by and say welcome." "Thank you," Nadine replied evenly. "I'm Nadine Walker." He repeated the name slowly, his eyes drifting toward the brick exterior of the home behind her. "Nice house," he remarked. "Must have taken a good job to land something like this in Fairgrove." She gave a small, polite smile. "I work in public service." Benson tilted his head. "Ah, one of those DC folks, huh?" Nadine didn't answer. She didn't need to. He shifted his tone. "You know, Fairgrove's a great community, real quiet, real safe, but that kind of peace, it takes maintenance." She raised an eyebrow. "I mean," he continued, "we've got an informal arrangement here. Some of the neighbors like to contribute to a small local watch fund. Not mandatory, of course, just helpful. Encourages a little extra patrol presence on streets like this." Nadine didn't blink. "Especially with new residents," he added. Her voice was steady. "Thank you, officer, but I believe public safety is a service already included in my property taxes." Benson's smile faltered, just slightly. Sure, I get that. But let's just say things run smoother when we're all on the same page." Nadine took a sip of tea, her gaze direct but unshaken. "I'm sure they do." The silence stretched, a quiet statement in itself. Benson gave a forced chuckle, tipped his cap, and turned back toward the street. But as he walked away, a slow burn started behind his eyes. She hadn't given him what he expected. No fear, no deference, no submission. And that, to Officer Craig Benson, was unacceptable. The next morning, the early sun filtered through the tall hedges along Pinehurst Lane, casting long golden lines across Nadine Walker's driveway. She stood by her mailbox, sorting through the standard mix of welcome offers, circulars, and utility forms. She moved with the ease of someone who was used to transitions, but also someone who paid attention to patterns. From down the block, the low hum of a familiar patrol cruiser began to rise. She didn't look up at first, but she didn't need to. Officer Craig Benson slowed his car deliberately as he neared 178 Pinehurst Lane. He didn't park this time, just rolled to a slow crawl along the curb. Their eyes met briefly as Nadine glanced up. She offered a courteous nod, nothing more. Benson drove on, but something in his posture was different now, stiffer, less casual than the day before. Later that afternoon, a folded note was tucked behind her screen door. No envelope. Just a single sheet of paper with a printed message. Fairgrove Hills Community Safety Initiative. Voluntary participation requested. A suggested donation of $250 helps support additional security presence in your area. Cash preferred. Drop-off box located at 41 Sycamore Court. There was no official letterhead, no contact name, just a vague signature. Neighborhood Patrol Liaison. Nadine read the note in full, then folded it slowly, precisely. She set it aside without comment. That evening, as the neighborhood settled into its usual rhythm, dog walkers, porch lights flicking on, sprinklers hissing over freshly trimmed lawns, there was a knock at her door. It wasn't loud, but it was firm. She opened it halfway. "Evening again?" Officer Benson said with a smile that no longer bothered to pretend. "Hope you got the note." "I did." "Well," he continued, "some folks don't always check their doors, so I thought I'd swing by in person. See if you had any questions. Make sure you felt included." Nadine stepped out onto the porch, her voice calm. It was clear. "Thank you." Benson waited for more. When none came, he cleared his throat. "You know, most of the neighbors chip in. It keeps things running smooth. Especially with all the budget cuts, we like to keep an eye out for each other." Her tone didn't change. "I believe in strong communities, officer, but I also believe in clarity. If there's a city-endorsed program, I'm happy to review it. If not, I consider the matter closed." His smile faltered. "It's just a gesture," he muttered. She met his eyes. "Then let's leave it as that." The silence stretched, and in it, something fragile shifted. Craig Benson, used to being obeyed without question, found himself standing on a porch that refused to flinch. No raised voice, no argument, just an unmovable line drawn in absolute calm. He nodded stiffly, stepped back, and walked down the steps. "Good night," she said before closing the door. He didn't reply. Back in his cruiser, he gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Her tone wasn't loud, but it had power. A kind of quiet that didn't bend, didn't apologize, didn't explain itself. And for the first time in a long time, Craig Benson felt something he didn't know how to name. Not fear, not guilt, just the sting of not being in control. It was a Saturday afternoon when he came back. The kind of afternoon where the air is still, the lawns are quiet, and the streets feel too neat for anything loud or out of place. Nadine Walker was in her front yard, watering the garden beds beneath her bay window. The hydrangeas had taken to the new soil better than expected. Then she heard the low growl of tires grinding against her driveway gravel. She didn't need to turn around. The patrol cruiser was parked not on the street but in her driveway, its bulk blocking the exit completely. Officer Craig Benson stepped out, not in his usual crisp calm but in something looser, sloppier. His shoulders were tight, his jaw clenched. His eyes had lost their neighborly mask. He didn't greet her. "You had time to think," he said flatly, walking toward her with slow, deliberate steps. Nadine placed the watering can down beside her. "Excuse me?" "That note," he said. "The one you ignored. I'm here to settle it. Let's not make this complicated." Her voice remained composed. "Officer Benson, what you're doing coming here, uninvited, demanding money, has another name. It's called extortion." He laughed, dry and bitter. "Extortion? Lady, this is about community. Everyone does it. Everyone." She crossed her arms. "Then you shouldn't need to threaten anyone to contribute." Something in his face twitched. The shift was sudden. He took a step closer. "You think you're clever," he muttered. "Quoting legal terms like you're somebody. I've lived here 20 years. I know who belongs. I know who doesn't." Nadine didn't flinch. "I belong here." Benson's voice dropped, venom seeping in. "Really? A black woman living alone in a place like this, in that house? You expect me to believe you came by it honestly?" She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence only made him spiral. "What are you? Some government handout success story? One of those diversity hires climbing the ladder on pity?" Still, she said nothing. And that silence seemed to strike deeper than any argument. "You people," he spat, "always think the rules don't apply when you've got your little titles and nice clothes and smug little speeches about fairness." His voice had risen now loud enough for a neighbor 2 doors down to pause at their window. "I've seen your type," he continued, stepping closer, "acting like you're better than the ones who built this place." Nadine's voice, when it came, was low and unwavering. "This isn't about community safety. This is about your pride. And the fact that I don't need your approval to live here disturbs you more than you care to admit." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, uncertainty maybe, but it vanished beneath a wave of rage. "You think you can talk to me like that?" he hissed. "On my street?" "It's not your street," Nadine said calmly, "and this conversation is over." She turned and stepped toward her porch. Behind her, Benson stood still, burning, bruised, and dangerously close to losing control. The air on Pinehurst Lane had gone still. What minutes ago was just another quiet Saturday afternoon now felt unnaturally dense, like the wind itself had retreated. Nadine Walker reached the first step of her porch when she heard the distinct sound of leather shifting, a movement she knew far too well. She stopped. Then came the unmistakable click of a weapon unholstered. "Don't walk away from me," Officer Craig Benson growled. She turned slowly. He stood at the edge of her lawn, feet planted wide, service weapon in hand, arms slightly raised. The barrel didn't point directly at her, but it didn't have to. The implication was loud enough. Nadine's pulse quickened, but her expression didn't change. Her training rose like a shield instinct, control, clarity. Her voice was even. "You need to put that down." Benson didn't move. "I'm not going to shoot you," he said, eyes sharp, voice unsteady. "But I want you to understand something. You may think you've got power, that you can talk circles around people like me. But out here on this street, I'm the one who keeps things in line." Nadine kept her hands at her sides, palms open. Her voice never wavered. "Threatening a civilian on her own property with a loaded firearm is not keeping things in line. It's criminal." Benson's lips curled. "Watch how you talk." "I don't need to raise my voice," she replied. "And I don't need to prove anything. But you do. That's why you're holding that gun." He blinked, just once, but it was enough to expose the crack behind his bravado. "You think I'm afraid of a woman with a job title?" he hissed. "You think a call to some friend at City Hall is going to scare me?" "No," she said softly. "I think the law will." A long silence passed between them. Then Benson took a slow step forward, tightening his grip. "You know what happens when someone new moves in and doesn't cooperate?" he muttered. "Things get unpredictable. Alarms don't get answered fast. Calls go missing. Accidents happen." Nadine didn't flinch. "An accident," he repeated, lowering his voice to a near whisper, "can happen to anyone, even to someone who thinks they're untouchable." Her stare didn't shift. "Are you done?" That question hung in the air. She didn't raise her tone, didn't invoke her title, didn't threaten back, because she didn't need to. The fear he wanted, the panic he expected, never came. Instead, Nadine stood unmoved, steady as steel beneath the soft breeze that had just begun to stir again. Her mind was already working, assessing angles, calculating distance, memorizing position, tone, and timing, and planning her next move. She knew one thing with absolute certainty. Power doesn't always announce itself by shouting. Sometimes it waits, measures, documents, and when it speaks, it does so in ways that can't be ignored. Officer Craig Benson stood beneath the fading light, his service weapon still raised just enough to cast a shadow across the steps of 178 Pinehurst Lane. And yet, it was clear to Nadine Walker he had already lost control. Not just of the situation, of himself. She could see it in the tremble of his fingers, in the twitch beneath his right eye, in the way his voice, once sharpened by ego, now sounded like something straining to hold its shape. She took a single breath. No sudden movements. Then slowly, methodically, she reached into the pocket of her coat. Benson's stance shifted. "Don't try anything," he snapped, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "I'm not," Nadine replied calmly. "I'm making a phone call." He didn't stop her. She retrieved her phone, unlocked the screen with a swipe of her thumb, and scrolled to a name labeled only R. Holt. One tap. She raised the phone to her ear, a single ring, then another. "Then Sheriff Raymond Holt," came the voice on the other end, low and steady. "Raymond," Nadine said, her voice controlled, but with a current of steel. "It's Nadine Walker." There was a pause. "Nadine?" His tone changed immediately. "Yes, I'm at my new residence, 178 Pinehurst Lane, Fairgrove Hills." Her eyes never left Benson's face. He had stopped breathing through his nose. His grip on the gun had loosened, just slightly. "I'm standing on my front porch," Nadine continued, her voice carrying just enough to ensure he heard every word. "There's a patrol officer on my property. His name is Craig Benson. Badge number," she glanced at the tag on his uniform, 8749. Benson's lips parted. "He has drawn his service weapon," she said, "and he is demanding money." He calls it a neighborhood contribution. I call it what it is. Another pause. On the line, she could hear the shift in Holt's breathing. I understand, he said. Stay where you are. Officers are en route. I'm on my way. Thank you, she said simply, then ended the call. Her hand dropped to her side, the phone still warm in her palm. Benson's voice was a whisper now. Wait, what did you say your name was? She looked at him without blinking. Nadine Walker. There was a long silence. Then, Deputy Director Walker, she added. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Something inside him cracked. The color drained from his face. The weight of the badge on his chest seemed to collapse inward. He stared at her, gun still in hand, mouth slightly open, as if the realization couldn't quite make it through the noise inside his head. You're FBI? She didn't answer. He took one stumbling step backward, then another. The gun dropped an inch, then two. A beat passed. Then, with a trembling hand, he slowly lowered the weapon to his side. But it was too late. Not because she had overpowered him, because he had just made a fatal mistake and she had recorded every word that mattered. The silence that followed her words hung heavier than any siren. Deputy Director, FBI. The phrase echoed in Craig Benson's head like a dull bell, repeating itself not in clarity, but in panic. He stared at Nadine Walker as if seeing her for the first time not as a woman, not as a neighbor, not even as someone he intended to intimidate, but as the one person he should never have touched. His gun was still in his hand, but it no longer served him. It dangled uselessly at his side, now a burden instead of a weapon. I didn't know, he stammered, taking a half step back. You didn't say who you were. You didn't say anything. Nadine didn't respond. Her silence made it worse. Look, this is a misunderstanding, he muttered, voice unraveling. I didn't mean for it to go this far. It was supposed to be. I was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe. That's all. I didn't know, God. I didn't know. Still, she said nothing. Her face remained composed. Not smug, not angry, just still. Benson's breath came in short, uneven bursts. The confidence, the casual cruelty that had coated his voice just minutes ago was gone, replaced by a kind of childish pleading that didn't belong in the mouth of a man wearing a badge. He opened his mouth again. Listen, I've got a family, a wife, 2 daughters. One's in college. Please don't ruin me. This isn't who I am. I've been under pressure. The job. It gets to you. The gun slipped from his fingers and landed on the ground with a dull thud. He stared at it as if it had betrayed him. Nadine's expression didn't change. Her silence now felt absolute. Not just the absence of words, but the presence of judgment. A judgment she didn't need to speak out loud, because she wasn't there to argue. She wasn't there to threaten. She was the consequence he hadn't anticipated. Please, he whispered, please don't say anything to the sheriff. Maybe we can just settle this quietly. Still nothing. He took another step back. His knees buckled slightly, and he caught himself on the edge of the driveway. I'll quit, he offered, voice cracking. I'll resign. I'll write you a letter of apology, hell. I'll donate to whatever cause you want. Just don't call it in. But she already had, and he knew it. The distant echo of sirens began to build slow, unmistakable. Benson's last fragments of pride fell away. He sank to his knees, hands shaking. I didn't mean it, he mumbled. I didn't mean to scare you. I didn't think. I didn't know who you were. Please. Nadine took one slow step forward, not to approach, not to engage, but to retrieve her phone from the ground where she had dropped it beside her. She looked down at him, but still not a single word. Because some silences don't beg for resolution. They speak louder than anything panic could shout. And in that moment, Craig Benson finally heard it. The wail of approaching sirens cut through the quiet of Pinehurst Lane, growing louder with every second. Craig Benson knelt on the edge of the driveway, his weapon on the ground, hands limp on his thighs. His once pressed uniform clung to him like guilt. Sweat beaded along his forehead. He didn't move. Couldn't. Nadine Walker stood a few feet away, motionless. She hadn't spoken since the phone call. She didn't need to. The street, the air, even the wind seemed to yield to her silence. Then the first patrol car turned onto the block, red and blue lights washing across the pristine facades of well-kept homes. Another car followed, then a black SUV with government plates. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Some stepped onto their porches, phones in hand. but none dared cross the line of quiet authority now filling the street. From the SUV, Chief Raymond Holt emerged. He wore plain clothes, but nothing about his presence was casual. His posture was crisp, his eyes sharp. He surveyed the scene in an instant. Nadine upright, composed. Benson slumped, broken, a duty weapon lying between them. He didn't ask questions. "Officer Benson," Holt said, voice carrying through the air like a verdict. "Stand up." Benson looked up, blinking. "Chief, please, I can stand up." Benson rose slowly, his face pale. Holt walked forward, stopping just short of the driveway. "You are hereby suspended effective immediately," Holt said coldly. "Hand over your badge, your weapon, and your radio." Benson opened his mouth again, but one look from Holt silenced him. With trembling hands, he reached to unclip his badge, then his belt. He handed over the equipment without resistance. Two uniformed officers stepped forward. Holt gestured to the squad car. "Escort him to holding. Log this as an internal use of force incident pending federal review." Benson didn't speak as they took him by the arms, not cuffed, but no longer free. He walked like a man whose knees were only just remembering how to move. Once he was in the car, Holt turned to Nadine. Their eyes met not as strangers, but as two professionals who had worked on the same side of justice long enough to recognize it when it arrived. "Nadine," he said, voice lower now, "are you all right?" She nodded once. "Yes, I'd like to give a formal statement." "Of course." They moved toward the porch, where Holt signaled another officer to begin collecting the weapon and documenting the scene. Nadine spoke with clarity, precision. She recounted the visit, the tone, the threats, the weapon, the phone call. She did not embellish, she did not waver, and never once did she raise her voice. When she finished, Holt let out a slow breath. "We'll move fast on this. There won't be a cover-up. I promise you that." "I know," Nadine said. She stepped back, collected the watering can still sitting by her feet, and placed it gently by the porch railing, a simple act that reminded everyone she still lived here. Chief Holt gave a final nod. "We'll be in touch by morning." As the last patrol car rolled away and the neighbors faded back into their homes, Nadine remained on her porch, not triumphant, not shaken, just quietly present, because justice wasn't noise, it was structure. And tonight, it had shown up right on time. The events of that Saturday evening didn't stay confined to Pinehurst Lane. By sunrise the next morning, the incident report had already reached multiple desks: Fairgrove Hills PD Internal Affairs, the District Attorney's Office, and most significantly, the Office of Federal Oversight at the FBI. The name attached to the complaint carried weight: Deputy Director Nadine Walker. What might have been dismissed as a neighborhood misunderstanding now stood at the intersection of civil rights violations, abuse of authority, and armed intimidation against a federal official. An internal affairs inquiry was opened within 48 hours. At the same time, the FBI initiated its own administrative probe, not because Nadine requested special treatment, but because the law required it. She had reported a sworn officer who drew a gun during a personal financial demand. That wasn't a misstep. It was a federal matter. The facts, already damning, were only compounded by the evidence. Security cameras from a nearby home had captured portions of the confrontation, including Benson's patrol car blocking Nadine's driveway and his aggressive posture on her lawn. The body camera, which Benson had deliberately muted early in the exchange, had reactivated accidentally during his panic. What it captured was fragmented but enough to reveal tone, threats, and desperation. Then came the personnel file. Years of quiet complaints. Residents, many of them from marginalized backgrounds, had submitted statements over the past decade. Dismissive language, excessive stops, veiled threats during traffic warnings. Most of them had gone uninvestigated. Now, they resurfaced like evidence waiting for oxygen. When confronted with the weight of what he'd done, Craig Benson didn't deny the encounter. He admitted to being too aggressive, citing job stress and personal issues. But when investigators pressed him about the gun, the threats, the financial demand, he paused, then pivoted, then fell silent. It wasn't enough. 3 weeks after the incident, Chief Raymond Holt, backed by a unanimous recommendation from Internal Affairs and the Department of Justice, signed the termination order. Craig Benson was officially removed from the Fairgrove Hills Police Department. But the consequences didn't stop there. Following a full legal review, the District Attorney's Office filed formal charges: felony extortion under color of authority, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, terroristic threats, official misconduct. The courtroom wouldn't just judge his behavior, it would define it. Nadine didn't speak publicly. She didn't need to. She had submitted her statement, cooperated with every inquiry, and then stepped back, allowing the system to work, not because she trusted it blindly, but because she was watching. Benson, once confident that his badge insulated him, now faced something far more powerful than fear. He faced accountability. And this time, there would be no driveway to stand on, no weapon to reach for, just a courtroom, a record, and the weight of his own decisions. The trial of Craig Benson began on a gray Monday morning in early fall. Outside the Fairgrove County Courthouse, reporters had gathered, local mostly, but attentive. The charges had drawn attention: extortion, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, abuse of authority. And though it wasn't the first time a police officer had faced indictment, there was something different this time. The woman who had filed the complaint wasn't just a civilian. She was Deputy Director Nadine Walker of the FBI, and she was in the courtroom. Benson sat at the defense table, no longer in uniform. His suit hung awkwardly on a frame that looked smaller than it had weeks earlier. The confidence that once fueled his presence had been replaced with something duller: resignation, perhaps, or disbelief that it had come this far. When Nadine was called to the stand, the room shifted. She didn't stride, she didn't command. She walked with the same calm precision she had shown on her porch the day he pulled a gun on her. Dressed in black with a navy blouse beneath her blazer, she sat, adjusted the microphone, and waited. The prosecutor began gently, asking her to recount the events of that afternoon. She did, without emotion, without embellishment, without skipping a single relevant detail. She described the tone of the first visit, the note on her door, the second confrontation, the weapon, the threats, the call to Chief Holt, and the exact moment Benson realized who she was. Every word was measured, every answer aligned with the evidence. It wasn't her title that gave the testimony weight, it was her discipline. Cross-examination was brief. The defense attempted to frame Benson's behavior as a momentary lapse, fueled by stress and long hours. They leaned into the idea that he felt threatened by Nadine's calm rejection of his so-called offer, but it didn't hold, especially not after the prosecution replayed excerpts from Benson's body cam recovered during forensic analysis, including audio of his veiled threats and panicked pleas. The courtroom was still when the jury returned its verdict: guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge didn't mince words. "Officer Benson," he said, "you were entrusted with authority not to dominate but to protect. What you did was not an error in judgment. It was a calculated abuse of power rooted in prejudice, ego, and entitlement." He paused, letting the silence settle. There is no room in law enforcement for men who see a badge as a shield from consequence. And there is no room in this courtroom for excuses masquerading as regret. The gavel fell. 6 years in state prison, no early parole recommendation, no leniency. Benson's shoulders sagged as the bailiff approached. He didn't protest. He didn't look back. Nadine remained seated. She didn't smile. She didn't exhale in triumph. This wasn't victory. It was confirmation. That what happened on Pinehurst Lane had been real. That the silence she held through every insult, every threat, every power play, had led to something louder than rage. It had led to truth. The neighborhood was quiet again. Fairgrove Hills, in the gentle hush of a late Sunday afternoon, looked like it always had: immaculate, orderly, almost untouched. Children's bicycles leaned against fences. Sprinklers clicked in neat rhythm. Wind rustled through hedges manicured within an inch of perfection. And on the front porch of 178 Pinehurst Lane, Nadine Walker sat in silence. A mug of black tea rested on the railing beside her. The hydrangeas she'd planted weeks ago were beginning to bloom in deeper color. Their roots had taken hold. So had hers. It had been just over a month since the sentencing. The media interest had cooled. The press calls had stopped. The trial had faded into the usual churn of headlines and court dockets. But Nadine remembered every detail. Justice had been served. Officially, publicly, permanently. Yet in the stillness of her porch, she also remembered what hadn't been seen: the slow erosion of trust that happened in silence. The long history of people who never got to make that call. The voices that were never believed because their names didn't carry a title. Because they weren't Deputy Director of the FBI. That truth didn't make her bitter. It made her purposeful. She didn't see her position as a shield. She saw it as a platform, a lens, a responsibility to speak when others couldn't, and to listen when others were ignored. She thought of the people who'd come forward during the investigation. Quiet voices who had once filed complaints about Craig Benson's tone, his conduct, his sudden drop-ins and silent warnings. So many of those reports had been filed away, unopened, undervalued, until hers forced them open. Nadine took a slow sip of tea. She didn't need the credit. She didn't want it. Her job wasn't to become the face of someone else's downfall. Her job, her purpose was to ensure that silence never again became a shield for abuse. She would go back to Washington in the coming week. Her office, her teams, her stack of pending case files would still be there. But something inside her had changed. She'd always known that federal law protected citizens from unlawful police conduct. But now, she'd lived it in her own driveway, with a gun pointed at her chest, from a man who thought her voice would go unheard. He had miscalculated. And while she knew her rank had helped her be heard, she couldn't forget those who weren't so lucky. She stood, setting her mug down, and stepped off the porch. Her shoes crunched gently on the gravel path she'd come to know well. Her neighborhood wasn't perfect, neither was her profession. But justice, if handled right, didn't require perfection. It required presence and resolve. Nadine looked down the street as a patrol car rolled slowly past, different badge, different face, same uniform. The officer nodded. She nodded back. Because the uniform wasn't the enemy. Silence was. And as long as she held her position, she would never let it win. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it stands quietly on a front porch. Sometimes it doesn't raise its voice but refuses to look away. And sometimes it arrives in the form of a woman who doesn't need to shout to be heard. Nadine Walker didn't fight back with force. She fought back with truth, with calm, with clarity. And in doing so, she reminded us of something too often forgotten. Silence protects power until someone dares to speak. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of a moment when someone in power crossed the line, hit the like button to help others hear it. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that titles don't define justice, actions do. Comment below if you've ever seen silence used as a weapon. And subscribe for more stories that expose, inspire, and never back down from the truth. Because together, we're not just telling stories, we're breaking the silence.